The ink on the divorce papers had been dry for 3 weeks, but Alara Voss's hands still shook when she touched them. She sat in the corner office of Bartholomew and Sons Legal Services' third floor of a building that smelled like old tobacco and older money, watching her reflection fracture in the rain-streaked window. Denver sprawled below her, gray and indifferent, a city that had watched her arrive as a bride 5 years ago and now watched her leave as something else entirely. Not a wife, not quite a woman if you believed what Thomas had screamed at her that final night. The lawyer, Mr. Bartholomew Sr., cleared his throat for the 4th time. He was a small man with spectacles that caught the weak November light, and he handled the divorce decree like it might contaminate him. Respectable men did not enjoy dissolving the marriages of respectable people, and Thomas Whitmore was nothing if not respectable. Surgeon, published researcher, member of the Denver Medical Society. A man whose hands saved lives 6 days a week and broke his wife's ribs on the 7th. But that part wasn't in the paperwork. Mrs. Whitmore, Bartholomew said, then caught himself. Miss Voss, I should say. The decree is final as of this morning. The judge has ruled in favor of dissolution on grounds of, he paused, adjusted his spectacles, incompatibility and failure to produce issue. Failure to produce issue. 3 words that meant barren. 3 words that meant defective. 3 words that were a lie, but a lie Alara had agreed to tell because the truth would have destroyed her completely. The truth was that Thomas Whitmore could not father children. The truth was that he had known this for 2 years and blamed her anyway. The truth was that when she finally found the medical records he'd hidden when she confronted him with evidence of his own sterility, he had backhanded her so hard she tasted copper for 3 days. And the truth was that she had broken his hand in return. That was the part she couldn't tell the judge, the part that would have made her the villain instead of the victim. Because a woman who fought back wasn't a victim at all. She was unnatural, aggressive, too much, always too much. Sign here, Bartholomew said, pushing the papers across his mahogany desk. And here, and initial here. Alara signed. Her penmanship, usually precise from years of keeping medical charts, came out jagged and wrong, like a child had forged her name. When she finished, Bartholomew pulled the papers back quickly, as if her failure might be contagious. I must say, Miss Voss, you're taking this quite well. Most women in your position would be— He searched for the word distressed. Alara looked at him fully for the first time since entering his office. She was taller than him by 4 inches, even sitting down. She'd learned to slouch in chairs to fold herself smaller, but today she sat straight. Most women in my position, she said quietly, would be glad to be alive. Bartholomew's face went pale. He shuffled papers he didn't need to shuffle. Yes. Well, good day to you, Miss Voss. She stood and he flinched. 6 feet 1 inch of woman rising from a leather chair, and the lawyer actually flinched like she might strike him. Alara left without another word. The rain had turned to sleet by the time she reached the boarding house where she'd been living since leaving Thomas's home 3 months prior. It was a narrow building on Larimer Street, sandwiched between a butcher shop and a dry goods store, and it smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and desperation. Her room was on the 4th floor. 1 window, 1 bed, 1 chair, 1 small writing desk that had seen better days. On that desk sat a wooden box that had belonged to her mother. Alara had found it 2 weeks ago while packing her few remaining belongings from the house she'd shared with Thomas. It had been in the attic, buried under winter quilts and forgotten wedding gifts, a box she'd never seen before but recognized instantly. The carved initials on the lid, M.V. Margaret Voss. Her mother had died when Alara was 16. At least that's what her father had told her. Consumption, he'd said, quick and merciful. They'd buried her in the cemetery outside Minneapolis, and Alara had stood at that grave every Sunday for a year, talking to the woman beneath the earth. Except now, looking at this box her father had hidden, Alara wasn't sure her mother was beneath that earth at all. She sat at the writing desk, the divorce papers still clutched in one hand, and opened the box with the other. Inside, a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a pressed flower long dead, a daguerreotype of a man Alara had never seen before, and underneath it all a single envelope addressed in her mother's handwriting. To James McCrae, Pine Ridge, Wyoming Territory. The letter had never been sent. Ilara had read it 17 times in the past 2 weeks. She'd memorized every word, every crossed-out line, every place where her mother's pen had hesitated and left small pools of ink like tears. The letter began, "My dearest James, I am writing to tell you what I should have said when you asked me to stay." It went on for 3 pages, a confession of love, a catalogue of regrets, an explanation of why Margaret had chosen duty over desire, propriety over passion, a loveless marriage to Ilara's father over a life with James McCrae. "I was afraid," Margaret had written, "afraid of what people would say, afraid that a woman my height would make you a laughingstock, afraid that loving you as fiercely as I did was unwomanly and wrong. So I married a man who made me feel properly small, and I have been miserable every day since." The letter ended with a question Margaret had never gotten to ask. "If I came to you now, would you still want me? Even though I am too tall, too old, too broken by my own cowardice?" Ilara set the letter down and picked up the daguerreotype. The man in the image was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed kind, even captured in silver and glass. On the back, written in fading pencil, James McCrae, 1855. Her mother had loved this man, had given him up, had spent her life regretting it, and then apparently had disappeared, because 3 days ago Ilara had gone to the Minneapolis cemetery and demanded to see the burial records for Margaret Voss. The groundskeeper had searched for an hour before admitting there were no records, no burial plot, no death certificate on file. Her father had lied. Ilara's hands stopped shaking. For the first time since leaving Bartholomew's office, she felt something other than numbness. She felt fury, bright and clarifying. Her father had lied about her mother's death. Thomas had lied about his sterility. Everyone in her life had crafted careful fictions and expected her to live inside them, small and quiet and grateful. She was done being quiet. Ilara pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. The advertisement had appeared in the Denver Post 3 days running. She'd noticed it only because it was in the matrimonial section, tucked between offers from widowers in California and minors in Montana. "Rancher in Wyoming Territory seeks strong wife. Must be willing to work hard, live remote, and partner in building a life. Age and appearance unimportant. Character essential. Reply to C. McCrae, Pine Ridge, Wyoming." C. McCrae. Could it be coincidence? Wyoming Territory, Pine Ridge. The same town mentioned in her mother's unmailed letter. Ilara didn't believe in coincidence. She wrote carefully, choosing each word like a stone in a foundation. "Mr. McCrae, my name is Ilara Voss. I am 26 years old and 6 feet 1 inch tall. I can read and write and do sums. I have worked as a nurse in field hospitals and know how to set bones, stitch wounds, and deliver babies. I am recently divorced. I cannot promise you children, but I can promise you honesty and hard work. I have one question before I proceed. Did you know a woman named Margaret Voss?" She paused, pen hovering over paper. This was madness. She was writing to a stranger about her mother's secret love affair, applying to marry a man she'd never met, based on nothing more than a matching surname and a decades-old letter. But what did she have to lose? Denver held nothing for her now. No home, no husband, no family. Just the smoking ruins of a life she'd never wanted in the first place. She added one final line, "I know how to heal wounds, but I do not know how to heal myself. Perhaps that makes us even." The reply came faster than she'd expected. 8 days later, a telegram arrived at the boarding house. The landlady brought it up herself, eyeing Ilara with open suspicion. Respectable women didn't receive telegrams from men. Ilara tipped her a nickel and closed the door. The telegram was brief. "Margaret Voss was the woman my father loved and lost. Come to Pine Ridge. We have much to discuss. Travel fare enclosed. C. McCrae." Inside the envelope was a bank draft for $50. More money than Ilara had seen since leaving Thomas. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the telegram until the words blurred. This man, this C. McCrae, knew her mother, had known about the love affair, was willing to pay her way to Wyoming to talk about it. Or a dark voice in her mind whispered, He's a con artist who preys on desperate women through matrimonial advertisements. But another voice, smaller and more honest, said, "What does it matter? You're desperate anyway." That night, Ilara packed her one carpet bag. She owned almost nothing. The boarding house dress she wore, two others like it, undergarments, her mother's box, her nursing kit, the leather case worn smooth from years of use. At the bottom of her bag she placed one more item, a small pistol Thomas had kept in his desk drawer. She'd taken it the night she left him, and she wasn't sorry. If C. McCrae turned out to be a liar, or worse, she would be ready. The train left Denver at dawn on December 23rd. Christmas was 2 days away, and the depot was packed with families heading home for the holiday. Ilara watched them from her seat in the third-class car, mothers fussing over children, fathers carrying luggage, everyone part of some neat, ordered world where people fit together like puzzle pieces. She had never fit anywhere. Too tall for a woman, too educated for a wife, too strong for her own good, Thomas used to say, usually right before he tried to prove her wrong. The train lurched forward and Denver fell away behind her. Wyoming territory unfolded outside the window in shades of white and gray, snow-covered plains that stretched to the horizon, mountains jagged as broken teeth, sky so vast it made Ilara feel like she was falling upward. She thought about her mother making this journey 30 years ago, running toward James McCrae or running away from him depending on which version of the story was true. Had Margaret sat in a train car like this one, watching the same landscape, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake? The train pulled into Pine Ridge just after noon on Christmas Eve. Ilara stepped onto the platform and the cold hit her like a fist. Mountain cold, the kind that burned in your lungs and made your eyes water. The town was exactly what she'd expected. One main street, false front buildings, horses tied to hitching posts, people hurrying through the snow with their heads down trying to get home before the weather turned worse. And at the far end of the platform a man was waiting. He stood alone, separate from the clusters of people greeting arriving passengers. Tall, dark coat dusted with snow, hat pulled low enough that she couldn't see his face clearly. In his hand he held a photograph. Ilara's breath caught. She knew that photograph. It was the only one of her mother as a young woman taken before Ilara was born. Margaret at 20 standing in front of a photographer's painted backdrop, her height impossible to hide, even in the formal pose. How did he have that photograph? The man looked up from the image to Ilara's face. Even at 30 feet away she saw the moment he recognized her, saw him go absolutely still. Then he started walking toward her. Ilara's hand went to her bag where the pistol rested beneath layers of clothing. Every instinct she'd honed working in field hospitals, the ones that kept you alive when soldiers came in screaming and bleeding, told her to run. But she'd come all this way. She'd left everything behind, so she stood her ground. The man stopped 3 feet away from her. Up close she could see his face, strong features weathered by sun and wind, dark beard with threads of silver, eyes the color of whiskey and just as burning. He was younger than she'd expected, early 30s maybe, and handsome in the way that frontier men were handsome, all hard angles and harder experience. "Miss Voss," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Mr. McCrae." He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her height, her worn dress, the way she held herself ready to bolt or fight whichever became necessary. Then he held out the photograph. "Your mother," he said, "was the most beautiful woman my father ever saw. He kept this picture until the day he died. 5 years ago I buried him with it in his pocket." Ilara's throat closed. "Then how do you have it?" "Because I found it last month when I was going through his things. Found it tucked inside a book I'd never seen him read. And with it, I found this." He pulled out a letter. Old paper, faded ink. Ilara recognized the handwriting instantly. Her mother's unmailed letter. "How?" Ilara whispered. "Margaret sent it," Colt said. "Not to my father, to me. 6 months after he died. It arrived with a note that said, 'Give this to James when you see him next. Tell him I'm sorry I was too afraid.'" The platform seemed to tilt beneath Alara's feet. "My mother is alive." Colt McCrae's expression softened just slightly. "I don't know." The return address on the envelope was a boarding house in Denver. I wrote back 3 times. Never got an answer. Alara's mind was racing. Her mother had been alive 6 months after James McCrae died. Had been in Denver. Had tried to reach him too late. Might still be alive now. "Why did you place that advertisement?" she asked. Colt looked at her steadily. "Because my father loved a woman he never had the courage to fight for. Because he married my mother to forget Margaret and made everyone miserable in the process. Because he told me on his deathbed that the only regret he had was choosing what other people thought over what he wanted. And because when I read your letter asking about Margaret Voss, I knew exactly who you were, and I thought maybe we both deserved a chance to not repeat our parents' mistakes." Behind them, the train whistle blew. Families were heading toward the exit. The station master was calling out warnings about the coming storm. Alara looked at this stranger holding her mother's photograph and letter. This man who had brought her 1,000 miles on nothing but a hunch and a hope. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know you came here looking for truth, not comfort. And I respect that. I know you're honest enough to admit you're divorced when you could have lied. I know you asked if I could heal myself, which means you understand that healing and being whole aren't the same thing." He paused. "And I know you look like your mother, but you hold yourself like you've been fighting a war." Alara's eyes stung. "I have been." "Then maybe," Colt McCrae said quietly, "you're tired of fighting alone." The snow was falling harder now, white flakes catching in his dark hair on the shoulders of his coat. The platform was emptying. Soon they would be the only 2 people left standing in the cold. "I can't promise you anything," Alara said. "I'm not whole. I'm not even sure I'm sane. I came here looking for answers about my mother, not a husband." "And I placed that advertisement looking for a partner, not a wife," Colt replied. "Maybe we start there." "You're asking me to marry you anyway." "I'm asking you to try. For 3 months. You stay at the ranch. We see if we can build something real instead of something convenient. And if at the end of 3 months you want to leave, I'll buy your ticket to anywhere you want to go." Alara studied his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the trap. She'd learned to spot predators. Thomas had taught her that at least. But all she saw in Colt McCrae's eyes was the same exhausted honesty she felt in her own bones. "Why 3 months?" she asked. "Because that's how long my father courted my mother before realizing he'd made a mistake. I figure if we're going to repeat their errors, we should at least time it right." Despite everything, despite the cold and the fear and the absolute insanity of this moment, Alara almost smiled. "And if people talk?" "They will. Pine Ridge is small. Everyone knows I've been alone for 5 years. They'll assume things." He met her eyes. "Will that bother you? Mr. McCrae, I just spent 5 years married to a man who broke my ribs and called it love. I don't particularly care what strangers think anymore." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, understanding. "Then we have an agreement." Alara thought about Denver, about the boarding house and the divorce papers and the life that had crumbled to ash. She thought about her mother's unmailed letter and her father's lies and 30 years of regret that had poisoned 2 families. She thought about standing at a grave that held no body talking to a ghost who might still be alive. And she thought about what Colt had said, that maybe she was tired of fighting alone. "We have an agreement," she said. 3 months. And then I decide." Colt held out his hand. Alara shook it. His grip was warm despite the cold, calloused from ranch work, strong but not crushing, the handshake of someone who knew his own strength and chose not to abuse it. "There's one more thing you should know," he said, releasing her hand. "The Reverend is waiting at the church. If we're going to do this trial marriage, Pine Ridge is going to insist we do it legal." "You want to marry me today? I want to give you the protection of my name so that no one in this town can say a word against you living at my ranch. After 3 months, if you leave, we file for divorce. Simple." Nothing about this was simple, but Alara had stopped believing in simple the day she found her mother's box. "All right," she said. "Let's get married." They walked through the snow toward the church at the end of Main Street. People stared. Of course they did. Alara was used to stares. But then an old woman in a black shawl stepped directly into their path. Her face was lined with decades of frontier living, and her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Mr. McCrae," she said, "you're making a mistake." Colt stopped. "Mrs. Henderson, this girl," the old woman looked Alara up and down, "looks just like Margaret Voss. I knew her, you know, 30 years ago when she came through here chasing after your father. I told James then he was a fool to love a woman taller than him. And look what it got him, a life of misery and an early grave." Alara felt Colt tense beside her, but before he could speak she stepped forward. She was taller than Mrs. Henderson by nearly a foot. She looked down at the old woman and spoke clearly enough for everyone on the street to hear. "My mother spent 30 years regretting that she listened to people like you. I won't make the same mistake." Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. Alara turned to Colt. "Shall we—" He was staring at her with something that might have been admiration. "Yes, let's." They left Mrs. Henderson sputtering in the snow. The church was cold and empty except for Reverend Parker, a nervous man who kept wiping his spectacles. He performed the ceremony quickly, stumbling over words he'd said 100 times before. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just two strangers making promises they weren't sure they could keep. When Reverend Parker said, "You may kiss the bride," Colt hesitated. "We don't have to," Alara said quietly. "I know, but I'd like to, if that's all right." She nodded. He kissed her gently, briefly, a kiss that promised nothing except that he'd asked first. And when they walked out of that church into the Christmas Eve snow, Alara wasn't sure if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. But for the first time in 5 years, she'd made a decision that was entirely her own. That had to count for something. The wagon ride to the ranch took an hour through snow that fell like a curtain between them and the rest of the world. Alara sat beside her new husband, a man whose last name she now shared, but whose first name she'd only learned 10 minutes ago when Reverend Parker read it aloud during the ceremony. Colt James McCrae. The same initials as his father, which felt like either providence or a warning. He hadn't spoken since they left the church. Just helped her into the wagon, tucked heavy wool blankets around her legs with a care that surprised her, and clicked his tongue at the horses. The silence should have been uncomfortable. After 5 years with Thomas, who filled every quiet moment with criticism disguised as conversation, Alara had learned to fear silence. It meant he was thinking, planning, working himself up to something. But this silence was different. Colt's hands on the reins were steady. His jaw was set but not clenched. He looked like a man concentrating on getting them home safely, not a man deciding which of her failures to enumerate first. Still, old habits died hard. "I should tell you," Alara said, breaking the quiet. "I'm not what you might expect in a wife." Colt glanced at her sideways. "I didn't expect anything. That's the point. I mean, I don't cook well. I can keep people alive in field hospitals, but I burn stew. I sew stitches, not dresses. And I'm not—" She hesitated, hating the word but needing to say it soft. "Good," Colt said simply. Alara blinked. "Good. Soft things don't survive out here." He nodded toward the landscape around them, nothing but white emptiness stretching to mountains that looked like they could cut the sky. "The land breaks soft things. I need a partner, not a decoration." Something in Alara's chest loosened slightly. "The women in town," she said, "they think you're making a mistake." "The women in town thought my father was making a mistake when he married my mother instead of waiting for yours. They were right then. Maybe they're right now." He looked at her fully. "But it's my mistake to make." "That's not very romantic." "I'm not a romantic man, Miss Voss." He paused. "Mrs. McCrae, I'm a practical one. Romance is what got our parents into trouble. They romanticized what they couldn't have and resented what they could." Alara pulled the blanket tighter. My father told me my mother died when I was 16. But she didn't. No, she sent you that letter 5 years ago, which means she was alive then. Might be alive now. Elara's voice caught. Why would my father lie about that? Colt was quiet for a moment. The wagon creaked. The horse's breath made white clouds in the frozen air. Shame, he said finally. My father kept your mother's photograph hidden in a book for 30 years. Never told my mother about Margaret. Never told me. When I found it after he died, I thought it was just some woman he'd known before he married. It wasn't until I found the letter with it that I understood. He shifted the reins. Some people bury their regrets. Some people bury the evidence. Is that what we're doing? Digging up old graves? Maybe. Or maybe we're making sure we don't end up in them. The ranch appeared through the snow like something out of a dream. Two-story house painted white with dark shutters, barn and outbuildings clustered around it like children around a mother's skirts, corrals with horses standing stoic in the weather, and beyond it all land that rolled away to forever. It was beautiful, isolated, the kind of place where you could disappear completely and no one would know, the kind of place where anything could happen. Colt brought the wagon to a stop near the porch. Before Elara could climb down, he was there, hands on her waist, lifting her, not helping her down, lifting her entirely. She gasped. She weighed nearly 200 pounds, and no man had ever simply picked her up like she was made of air. Thomas used to make her step down from carriages herself, claiming he had a bad back. She'd known it was a lie. He'd just wanted to remind her that her size made her a burden. Colt set her on the porch gently. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine. I'm just—" She looked up at him. He was only slightly shorter than her, maybe an inch. Their eyes were nearly level. "No one's ever done that before." Something flickered across his face. "Then you've been with the wrong people." He opened the front door and gestured for her to enter first. The house was warm. 2 fireplaces already burning, filling the space with the smell of pine and smoke. The main room was large, furnished simply but well. Leather chairs worn soft with use, rugs on polished wood floors, books on shelves, more books than Elara had expected, and on the mantel a photograph in a silver frame. A woman with dark hair and soft eyes, pretty in a delicate way. Beside her a younger Colt with his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling, but something about the smile looked painted on. "Sarah," Colt said, following Elara's gaze. "My wife. She died 5 years ago, giving birth to our daughter Emma. The baby didn't survive either." His voice was flat. Not cold, just carefully emptied of emotion. Elara had heard that tone before. In field hospitals, when surgeons had to tell families there was nothing more they could do. When you had to deliver unbearable news, and the only way to get through it was to feel nothing at all. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. You didn't know her." Colt moved past the photograph without looking at it. "I'll show you the house." He led her through rooms that were clean but felt unlived in. A kitchen with a stove that gleamed. A dining room with a table that could seat 8 but looked like it never had. A study with a desk covered in ledgers and a window that looked out over the corrals. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms. The first was clearly his. Bed made military tight, clothes hung with precision. Nothing personal except a pair of worn boots beside the door. The second was empty except for dust and memories. This was going to be Emma's room, Colt said from the doorway. He didn't enter. Sarah had it all planned. Yellow curtains, a cradle Diego was building. She died 3 days before it was finished. Elara looked at the empty room and felt the weight of all the futures that had died here. The 3rd bedroom was at the end of the hall. "This is yours," Colt said, "for the 3 months, or longer if you decide to stay." The room was smaller than his, but bright. Someone had made up the bed with fresh linens, put flowers in a vase on the dresser, real flowers in December, which must have cost a fortune. "You did this?" Elara asked. "Diego helped. My foreman. You'll meet him tomorrow." Colt stood in the doorway, not entering, like he needed her permission to step into her space. There's a lock on the door. Keys in the drawer of the nightstand. Elara turned to look at him. Why would I need a lock? Because you should have the choice. This is your room. I won't come in unless you ask me to. Something in Elara's throat tightened. Thomas had removed the lock from their bedroom door 3 months into their marriage. Said married people shouldn't have secrets. What he meant was that she shouldn't have sanctuary. Thank you, she said quietly. Colt nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. There's something else you should know, about why I really placed that advertisement. Elara waited. When I found your mother's letter, I wrote back to that boarding house in Denver like I told you, but I also hired someone to look for her, a Pinkerton man. Colt pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. He found her. The room tilted. She's alive. She was 3 months ago, working as a nurse at a charity hospital in Denver, St. Catherine's on Blake Street. He held out the paper. That's the address, and a photograph the Pinkerton man took from a distance. I didn't want to contact her until I talked to you. She's your mother. You should decide if you want to see her. Elara took the paper with shaking hands, unfolded it. The photograph was grainy, taken from across a street, but there was no mistaking the woman in the nurse's uniform standing outside a hospital door. Margaret Voss. Older, grayer, thinner, but alive. Alive. Why didn't you tell me this before? Elara whispered. Because if I'd told you in Denver, you might have gone to her instead of coming here. And I needed you to choose this. Choose me. Not because of your mother, but despite her. Elara looked up at him. That's manipulative. Yes. You should have told me immediately. Probably. I could leave right now, take this address and go back to Denver, and you'd have wasted all this time and money. You could. Colt met her eyes. Will you? Elara looked back at the photograph. Her mother who she'd mourned for 10 years. Her mother who'd been alive the whole time. Her mother who'd abandoned her to a father who lied, and a husband who hurt her, and a life that nearly killed her. Part of her wanted to scream. Part of her wanted to cry. Part of her wanted to get on the next train to Denver and demand answers. But another part, the part that had survived Thomas and the war hospitals and every single person who'd ever told her she was too much, that part said, wait. No, Elara said slowly. I won't leave. Not yet. Why not? Because you're right. If you'd told me in Denver, I would have run to her. And I would have been running from something instead of toward something. She folded the paper carefully. I've spent my whole life reacting to other people's choices. My father's lies, Thomas's cruelty, even my mother's abandonment. For once, I want to make a choice that's mine. Colt's expression softened. And what choice is that? To stay. For 3 months, to see if we can build something that isn't haunted by our parents' ghosts. She looked at him directly. But I need you to promise me something. What? No more secrets. If we're doing this, if we're really trying to be partners, then we tell each other the truth. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped into the room just over the threshold. I promise. But you have to promise the same thing. I do. Then tell me one truth right now. Something you haven't told anyone else. Elara's heart started pounding. She thought about all the truths she carried. The real reason her marriage ended. What Thomas had done. What she'd done in return. But there was another truth deeper and more shameful. I'm glad my mother left, she said softly. When I thought she was dead, I could mourn her. I could make her into a saint in my mind, someone who would have understood me, who would have protected me from my father and from Thomas. Her voice cracked. But if she's alive, if she's been alive this whole time and never came back for me, then I have to face the fact that maybe she didn't want me, and I don't know if I can survive that truth. Colt crossed the room in 2 strides, stood in front of her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. My truth, he said quietly. I married Sarah 3 weeks after my father died. Not because I loved her, because I was drowning in guilt and she was there and marrying her felt like what I was supposed to do. And every day of our marriage she knew. She knew I was thinking about someone else, and it killed her long before childbirth did. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. So maybe our mothers made mistakes. Maybe they were cowards. But we're making different mistakes, better ones, and maybe that's the best we can do. Elara reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated touch with a man since leaving Thomas. The first time she'd wanted to. "Your turn," she said. "Ask me something. Why did you really leave your husband?" Elara had known this question would come eventually, had practiced answers in her mind, gentle lies, partial truths, but she'd promised honesty. "Because I finally fought back," she said. "He hit me, and I hit him harder, broke his hand. And when I saw the shock on his face when I realized he'd never considered that I might be strong enough to hurt him back, I knew I had to leave. Because next time I might do worse. Next time I might kill him." She waited for Colt to flinch, to step back, to look at her the way everyone else had looked at her when they sensed the violence she was capable of. But he didn't. "Good," he said simply. "Good. Good that you fought back. Good that you left. Good that you're strong enough to survive him." He squeezed her hand gently. "I don't want a wife who breaks. I want a partner who breaks things that need breaking." Something in Elara's chest cracked open. Not painfully, like ice breaking in spring. "I should warn you," she said, "I'm not easy to live with. Neither am I. I have nightmares. From the hospitals. Sometimes I wake up screaming. I have nightmares too. From Sarah. From Emma. Sometimes I don't sleep at all. I don't know if I can ever love anyone again. Thomas broke something in me." Colt was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll be broken together, and maybe that's enough." Outside the wind picked up. Snow battered the windows. The house creaked and settled around them. "It's Christmas Eve," Elara said suddenly. "So it is. I haven't celebrated Christmas in 5 years. Thomas thought it was frivolous. I haven't celebrated in 5 either, since Sarah died." They looked at each other, two people who'd forgotten how to want anything good. "We could try," Elara said. "Just this once." Colt's face did something strange. The careful blankness cracked, and underneath it was something raw and young and desperately hopeful. "I'll make coffee," he said. "And there's bread Diego left. It's not much. It's more than I've had in a long time." They went downstairs together. Colt made coffee while Elara sat at the kitchen table and watched him move around the space with easy familiarity. He cut bread with a knife that had seen decades of use, poured coffee into mismatched cups. They ate in comfortable silence. When they finished, Colt said, "There's one more thing I need to show you." He led her back to the study, opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a leather journal. This belonged to Sarah. She kept a diary. I found it after she died and I read it once and then I locked it away because I couldn't stand what was in it. He handed it to Elara. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you promised honesty, and this is honest. Sarah wrote the truth about our marriage, about me, about what it's like to love someone who can't love you back." His voice was rough. "If you're going to stay here even for 3 months, you should know who I really am, not who I'm trying to be, who I was." Elara took the journal. It was heavy in her hands. "You don't have to read it tonight," Colt said, "but read it eventually, and if after you do you want to leave, I'll understand." He turned to go. "Colt," Elara said. He stopped. "Thank you for being honest, even when it costs you." He nodded and left her alone in the study. Elara sat down at the desk, opened the journal. Sarah's handwriting was neat and small and sad. The first entry was from 6 years ago. "Colt asked me to marry him today. He doesn't love me, I know that, but I love him enough for both of us. Mother says love can grow if you tend it carefully. I will tend it so carefully." Elara's throat closed. She flipped through pages, months of entries, Sarah describing her attempts to make Colt happy, to be the wife he needed, to compete with a ghost named Margaret Voss. And then near the end, "I'm pregnant. Colt is pleased but not happy. I don't think he knows the difference anymore. I pray this baby will fix us. We'll give him something to love that isn't a memory. But I'm afraid. Afraid that even a child won't be enough. Afraid that I'll die trying to give him what he really wants. A second chance with someone else. The entry was dated 3 days before Sarah died. Elara closed the journal. She sat in that study for a long time holding a dead woman's diary, understanding for the first time what it meant to inherit someone else's heartbreak. Finally she stood and walked upstairs. Her room, with the lock on the door and the key in the drawer. But she didn't go to her room. She went to Colt's. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, still fully dressed, staring at nothing. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "I read it," Elara said. "All of it. Enough." Colt's jaw tightened. "Then you understand." "I understand that Sarah loved you, and that you tried to love her back and couldn't, and that both of you suffered for it." Elara stepped into the room. "But I also understand something else." "What?" "She forgave you. In the last entry she wrote that if she didn't survive, she hoped you'd find someone who could love you the way you needed to be loved. Someone strong enough to hold all of you, even the broken parts." Colt's face crumpled. "She shouldn't have forgiven me." "Maybe not. But she did anyway." Elara sat down beside him on the bed, not touching, just close. "And maybe that's what we do. We forgive the people who break us, not because they deserve it, but because carrying the anger hurts worse than letting it go." They sat in silence. Outside church bells rang. Midnight. Christmas. "I don't know how to do this," Colt said quietly. "How to be with someone without destroying them." "Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out together." Elara held out her hand. Colt looked at it for a long moment. Then he took it. They sat like that until dawn. Two broken people holding on to each other in the dark. Not fixing anything. Not promising anything. Just refusing to let go. The first week at the ranch passed in careful distance. Elara woke each morning to find Colt already gone. Out riding fence lines before dawn, Diego told her, or checking on cattle in the far pastures or breaking ice on the water troughs so the horses could drink. Work that needed doing, but also work that kept him away from the house until after dark. She understood. They'd sat together on Christmas morning until the sun came up holding hands like children afraid of the dark. And then the light had arrived, and they'd both realized what they'd done, how much they'd revealed, how dangerous it was to let someone see you that vulnerable. So they'd retreated to opposite corners of their lives. Elara spent her days exploring the ranch, learning its rhythms, the barn where Diego kept his tack organized with military precision, the chicken coop where hens complained about the cold, the root cellar stocked with enough preserves to survive a siege. And she spent her evenings in the study reading Sarah's diary. Not all at once. She couldn't bear it. But entry by entry learning about the woman whose ghost lived in every room of this house. Sarah had been kind, patient, everything a frontier wife was supposed to be. She'd sewn curtains and baked bread and tended a garden that died the winter she did. She'd tried so hard to make Colt love her, and the trying had killed her just as surely as the childbirth. On the fourth day, Elara found an entry that made her close the diary and stare at nothing for an hour. "I went to Denver last month while Colt thought I was visiting my sister. I found Margaret Voss. She works at St. Catherine's Hospital. I watched her for 3 days before I got the courage to approach her. When I finally did, I told her who I was, told her about Colt, about how he still loves her even though he's married to me. I asked her to please, please never come to Wyoming, because if she did, I would lose him completely. She cried, said she'd already lost James and she wouldn't take his son from someone else. She promised to stay away. I should feel relieved. Instead, I feel like a coward who begged another woman to keep my husband." Elara read the entry 3 times. Sarah had found Margaret, had talked to her, had extracted a promise, which meant her mother knew about Colt, knew he existed, knew he'd been trapped in a loveless marriage just like she had been, and she'd done nothing. The anger came fast and hot. Elara stood up so quickly the chair fell backward. She paced the study, hands shaking, trying to breathe through the fury. Her mother had been alive, had known Alara existed somewhere. Could have found her. Could have written. Could have done something. But instead she'd made a promise to a dying woman's ghost and stayed away. Alara grabbed her coat and walked out into the snow. The cold hit her like a slap, but she welcomed it. Walked fast toward the barn, needing movement, needing to do something with the rage burning in her chest. She found Diego in the tack room mending a bridle by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, took one look at her face and set the leather aside. "You found something," he said. Not a question. "Sarah's diary. She went to Denver, found my mother, asked her to stay away from Colt." Diego nodded slowly. "I wondered if she'd written about that. You knew?" "Sarah told me before she died, asked me to make sure Colt never knew. She didn't want him to feel guilty about one more thing." Diego stood, his old joints creaking. "Your mother kept that promise, you know. Never came here, even after Sarah died." "She should have come anyway," Alara said bitterly. "She should have fought for what she wanted, instead of letting everyone else decide her life." Maybe. Or maybe she learned from James that sometimes fighting isn't enough. Sometimes the timing is just wrong and you can't force it right no matter how hard you try. Alara turned away, staring at the neat rows of saddles and bridles. Everything in its place, everything ordered and controlled. "I don't know if I can forgive her," she said quietly. "Then don't. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't something you decide to do. It's something that happens when you're ready." Diego picked up the bridle again. "In the meantime, you're here. She's in Denver, and Colt is out there working himself to death because he's afraid if he stops moving he'll have to feel something. What am I supposed to do about that? Same thing he's supposed to do about you hiding in this barn. Stop running from each other." Alara looked at the old man. "You're very direct." "I'm old. I don't have time for pretty lies." He pointed toward the door with the bridle. "He's in the north pasture, checking on a mare that's about to foal. If you hurry, you can catch him before he finds another excuse to stay away." Alara hesitated. Then she nodded and left. The north pasture was a 20-minute walk through snow that came up to her knees in places. By the time she reached it, her skirts were soaked and her face was numb. She found Colt in a small shelter he'd built for the pregnant mare. The horse was lying down, breathing hard, eyes rolling white with pain. Colt knelt beside her, one hand on her neck, speaking in low tones. He didn't notice Alara until she was right next to him. He looked up, startled. "What are you doing out here?" "Diego said you might need help." "I've delivered foals before. I've delivered babies before." Alara knelt on the other side of the mare. "Looks like she's been in labor a while." 3 hours. "Something's wrong. The foal isn't positioned right." Alara ran her hands over the mare's belly, feeling. The horse whickered nervously but didn't pull away. "Breech," Alara said. "I can feel the back legs instead of the front." "Can you turn it?" "Maybe, if you can keep her calm." They worked together in the dim shelter. Colt held the mare's head, stroking her neck and murmuring reassurances while Alara did what she'd done 100 times in field hospitals. Reached inside, found the foal, carefully manipulated tiny legs, and a too big head until everything was where it needed to be. The mare screamed, thrashed, nearly kicked Alara twice, but finally, blessedly, the foal slid free in a rush of fluid and blood. Alara caught it, cleared its nose and mouth, rubbed it roughly with her coat until it coughed and started breathing. A filly. Dark coat, white star on her forehead. Alive. Colt sat back on his heels, covered in sweat despite the cold. "You saved her." "We saved her." Alara set the foal down near its mother. The mare immediately started licking it clean. "You kept her calm. I just moved some pieces around." They watched the filly try to stand. Fail. Try again. Fail again. Finally, on the 4th attempt, she got all 4 legs under her and stood wobbling next to her mother. "She's going to make it," Colt said softly. "Yes." They were both filthy, covered in blood and birth fluids and dirt. Alara's dress was ruined. Her hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline. Colt stood and offered her his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." They stood there in the small shelter with the mare and her new filly, neither of them moving. "I've been avoiding you," Colt said finally. "I know. Not because I want to, because I don't know how to be around you without wanting things I shouldn't want yet." Ilara's breath caught. "What things?" "To talk to you. To hear what you think about books I've read or things I've seen. To know what made you smile before life taught you not to." He looked at her directly. "I told you I'm not a romantic man. That was a lie. I'm terrified of being romantic because every time I've wanted something I've destroyed it. You didn't destroy this filly. Because you were here." The mare nickered softly. The filly nursed tail, swishing with new life. "I read more of Sarah's diary," Ilara said. "She went to Denver, found my mother, asked her to stay away from you." Colt went very still. "When?" "6 years ago, a few months before Sarah died." Ilara pulled off her ruined gloves. "My mother promised, kept that promise even after Sarah was gone, even though she knew you were alone." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm angry. At my mother for being a coward, at Sarah for manipulating her, at you for making everyone around you feel like they had to protect you from your own feelings." Ilara's voice shook. "And mostly at myself for coming here thinking I could somehow fix 30 years of other people's mistakes." Colt flinched like she'd hit him. "You're right," he said, "about all of it. I don't want to be right. I want to stop being angry, but I don't know how." "Then be angry. Be furious. Break something if you need to." Colt gestured at the shelter around them. "Just don't leave. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because you're the first person in 5 years who's treated me like I'm not made of glass, who's called me on my self-pity instead of tiptoeing around it. And because when I saw you walk through that snow to help me with this mare, I thought maybe there's still something in me worth saving." Ilara looked at him. Really looked. At the exhaustion in his eyes. The way he held himself like a man carrying weight that would crush him if he set it down. The desperate hope he was trying to hide. She recognized all of it. Saw it in her own mirror every morning. "I'm not here to save you," she said quietly. "I know. I'm barely keeping myself together. Most days I wake up and have to remember why I shouldn't get back on a train to Denver and demand answers from my mother that will probably destroy me." "I know that too." "Then what are we doing, Colt? What is this?" He was quiet for a long moment. The filly made small, contented sounds. The mare dozed finally at peace. "I think," Colt said slowly, "we're two people who are tired of pretending to be fine. And maybe that's enough to start with." Ilara thought about the past 5 years. About Thomas and his perfect house and his perfect reputation and the private hell he'd made of their marriage. About smiling through broken ribs and lying to doctors and playing the role of gracious wife while dying inside. She was so tired of pretending. "All right," she said. "No more pretending. Starting now." "Starting now," Colt agreed. They walked back to the house together through snow that had started falling again. Not touching, not talking, just walking side by side like two soldiers who'd survived the same battle. When they reached the porch, Ilara turned to him. "I need to tell you something true," she said, "and it's going to sound insane. Tell me anyway. Sometimes I'm glad Thomas hit me, because it gave me permission to leave. And I hate myself for needing that permission, for not being strong enough to leave just because I was unhappy." Colt didn't look shocked or disgusted. He just nodded. "Sometimes I'm glad Sarah died," he said, "because it meant I didn't have to spend the rest of my life watching her try to love me, and I hate myself for that thought every single day." They stared at each other, two people who'd just confessed unforgivable things. "We're terrible," Ilara said. "Probably. We deserve each other. Definitely." And then, impossibly, Ilara laughed. A real laugh, not the polite sounds she'd made at Thomas's dinner parties. Loud and undignified and completely genuine. Colt smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and made him look 10 years younger. "Come on," he said. "Let's get cleaned up before Diego sees us like this and has a heart attack." They went inside. Ilara heated water for a bath while Colt built up the fire. They moved around each other in the kitchen like they'd done it 1,000 times before. When the water was ready, Colt carried the heavy pot upstairs to her room without being asked. "I'll heat more for myself after," he said, setting it down by her wash basin. "Thank you." He started to leave, then paused at the door. "Ilara." "Yes." "I'm glad you're here, even if it's just for 3 months, even if you leave after. I'm glad I got to know you." Something in her chest went warm. "I'm glad too," she said. After he left, Ilara locked her door and stripped off her ruined dress, washed the blood and dirt from her skin with water that had gone lukewarm. Dressed in clean clothes that smelled like the lavender sachets someone had left in the dresser, she felt different, lighter, like she'd set down something heavy she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. That night at dinner, Diego raised his eyebrows at both of them but said nothing about their improved moods. He just served stew he'd made and bread that was only slightly burned and pretended not to notice when Colt and Ilara kept stealing glances at each other across the table. After dinner, they sat in the living room. Diego smoked his pipe and read a Spanish newspaper. Colt worked on ranch accounts. Ilara picked up a book from the shelf, something about cattle breeding that should have been boring but wasn't, because Colt kept explaining things without being asked. It felt domestic, normal, like this was what they did every evening instead of this being the first time they'd sat in the same room without looking for escape routes. Around 9, Diego excused himself to his cabin behind the barn. Colt closed his ledger. "I should let you get some rest." "I'm not tired yet." "Neither am I." They sat in silence. The fire crackled. Snow tapped against the windows. "Can I ask you something?" Ilara said. "Anything. What did you think when you first saw me at the train station? Be honest." Colt considered. "I thought you looked like you were ready to bolt or fight, like you'd been surviving on adrenaline so long you'd forgotten how to just exist. And now? Now I think maybe we're both learning how to exist again, together." Ilara set down her book. "I don't know what I'm doing, Colt. I don't know how to be a wife. I barely know how to be a person anymore." "Then we'll figure it out as we go." "What if we can't? What if 3 months isn't enough? Then we'll take more time, or we'll part ways, and at least we tried." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm just asking you to stay long enough to find some of them." Ilara thought about Denver, about her mother working at St. Catherine's Hospital, maybe wondering if Ilara would ever find her, about all the questions she needed answers to. But she also thought about the filly standing on wobbly legs, about Colt's smile when she'd laughed, about feeling for the first time in years like she might be somewhere she was meant to be. "All right," she said, "I'll stay. For 3 months. For as long as it takes to figure out if this is real or if we're just two broken people clinging to each other because we're afraid to be alone." Colt stood, crossed to where she sat, held out his hand. "Either way," he said, "I'd rather be broken with you than whole without you." Ilara took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, not quite touching anywhere except where their hands met. "Good night, Ilara." "Good night, Colt." He let go first, turned and walked upstairs. Ilara waited until she heard his door close. Then she went to her own room, locked the door out of habit, lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She thought about Sarah's diary hidden in the study, about her mother's promise, about all the ghosts that lived in this house. But she also thought about Colt's hand in hers, about the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of something damaged. And for the first time since leaving Thomas, Ilara fell asleep without nightmares. The blizzard hit on the 3rd week of January with a violence that made previous snowfalls look like mercy. Ilara woke to a house that groaned under wind strong enough to bend trees. Snow didn't fall so much as hurl itself sideways, turning the world beyond the windows into a white roar of nothing. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Colt already in the kitchen, staring out at the storm with a face carved from worry. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough that Diego stayed in his cabin last night instead of risking the walk back. Bad enough that we're not going anywhere for days." He turned to her. "We have enough food, enough wood. We'll be fine as long as the house holds. And if it doesn't, then we pray." They spent the morning securing what could be secured, bringing in extra firewood from the covered porch, filling every pot and bucket with water in case the pump froze, moving food from the root cellar to the kitchen so they wouldn't have to go outside. By noon, the wind had reached a pitch that sounded like screaming. By nightfall, they were trapped. The snow piled against the doors so high they couldn't open them. The windows were covered completely, turning the house into a cave lit only by firelight and lamps. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the inside of the glass. Colt built fires in both fireplaces and kept them roaring. Ilara made soup from salt pork and dried vegetables enough to last several days. They worked together in efficient silence, two people who'd learned to anticipate each other's movements over 3 weeks of careful coexistence. But when night came and the storm showed no signs of stopping, the silence became something else. They sat in the living room as close to the fire as they could get without burning. Colt had brought down extra blankets. Ilara had made tea that had gone cold in their cups. "Tell me about the hospitals," Colt said suddenly. Ilara looked up surprised. "Why?" "Because we've been living together for 3 weeks, and I know almost nothing about who you were before you came here. Only who you're trying not to be." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind shrieked like something dying. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." Ilara pulled her blanket tighter. "I started nursing during the Indian Wars. I was 21. My father had just remarried, and his new wife made it clear I wasn't welcome. I needed to leave, and the army needed nurses, so I volunteered." "That must have been hard." "It was necessary." She stared into the fire. "The first man I tried to save died in my arms. Gut shot. Nothing I could do. He was 19 years old, and he called for his mother until he couldn't call anymore." Colt said nothing, just listened. "After that it got easier. Not because I cared less, but because I learned to wall off the part of me that felt. You can't break down crying over every soldier who dies. You'd never stop crying." She took a breath. "I got good at it, at turning off my emotions, at doing what needed to be done, no matter how terrible." "Is that how you survived, Thomas?" "Yes. I'd had years of practice shutting down feelings. When he started hitting me, I just went to that same place, became the efficient nurse handling a difficult patient, followed procedures, minimized damage, survived. Until you couldn't anymore." "Until I couldn't anymore," she agreed. The fire popped. Sparks drifted up the chimney. "You asked me once why I really placed that advertisement," Colt said. "I told you it was because of my father's regrets. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." Ilara waited. "Sarah didn't die in childbirth," he said quietly. "Not exactly. She bled to death after. The doctor said it happens sometimes. Bodies just give up. But I think she gave up before her body did. I think she was so tired of trying to make me love her that when the baby died she just let go." His voice was flat, emotionless, the same tone Ilara used when she talked about soldiers dying. "You can't know that," she said gently. "I was there. I held her hand while she bled out, and she looked at me and said, 'I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed.' Those were her last words, an apology for not being someone else." Ilara's throat tightened. "So, when I placed that advertisement," Colt continued, "I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for honesty. Someone who wouldn't pretend, who wouldn't try to fix me or change me or mold themselves into whatever they thought I wanted. I was looking for someone who was as broken as I was. And you thought that would be easier. I thought it would be more honest." He finally looked at her. "Was I wrong?" Ilara considered. "I don't know yet. Ask me in 2 more months." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, then disappeared. They sat in silence as the storm raged. Hours passed. The fire burned low and Colt added more wood. Midnight came and went. "I'm not tired," Elara said. "Neither am I. Tell me about Emma, your daughter." Colt's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because you never talk about her. You talk about Sarah, about your father, but never Emma." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, dark hair like Sarah's. She lived for 3 hours, long enough for me to hold her, long enough for me to name her, long enough for me to love her." His voice cracked on the last word. "And then she just stopped breathing. No warning, no reason. The doctor said her heart wasn't formed right, said she never had a chance. But for 3 hours, I had a daughter. And then I didn't." Elara reached out and took his hand. He gripped it like a drowning man grabbing a rope. "I never told Sarah this," he said, "but when Emma died, part of me was relieved. Because I knew I was a terrible father, knew I couldn't love her the way she deserved, knew I'd fail her the same way I failed Sarah, and I hated myself for feeling that relief. Still do. You wouldn't have failed her. You can't know that. Neither can you. You never got the chance to try." They sat holding hands while the storm tried to tear the house apart around them, and then Elara started to shake. Not from cold, from something deeper, something that had been building inside her for weeks. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice came out strange, tight. "About Thomas. You don't have to. I do. Because if I don't tell someone, I think it's going to kill me." Colt turned to face her fully. "Then tell me." "The night I left him, the night I broke his hand, that wasn't the worst thing that happened." She was shaking harder now. "He'd been drinking, more than usual, and he told me he'd found someone else, a nurse at the hospital, young and pretty and fertile. Everything I wasn't." Her breath was coming in gasps. "He said he was going to divorce me and marry her. But first he wanted to make sure I understood what I was losing. So he—" She stopped, started again. "He tried to force himself on me. Said it was his right as my husband. Said I owed him one last time." Colt's hand tightened on hers, but he didn't speak. "I fought him. Really fought. Used everything I'd learned in the hospitals about where to hit to cause maximum damage. Broke his hand. Broke his nose. Kneed him hard enough that he couldn't walk for a week." Her voice was shaking as badly as her body. "And then I packed a bag and left while he was still on the floor bleeding." "Good," Colt said fiercely. "You should have killed him." "I wanted to. That's what terrifies me. I had my hands around his throat and I wanted to squeeze until he stopped moving. And the only reason I didn't was because I knew if I killed him I'd never be free. I'd be his forever, his victim or his murderer. Either way, he'd own me." She was crying now, full sobs that shook her whole body. "So I left, and I filed for divorce. And I let him tell everyone I was barren and crazy and unnatural. Let him keep his reputation. Let him marry his pretty young nurse, because all I wanted was to be away from him." Colt pulled her into his arms. She fought for a second instinct telling her that being held meant being trapped, but he didn't tighten his grip, just held her gently, giving her space to pull away if she needed to. She didn't pull away. She collapsed against him and cried like she hadn't cried in 5 years. Cried for the girl who'd volunteered for the army hospitals thinking she could save people. Cried for the woman who'd married Thomas thinking she could build a normal life. Cried for every moment she'd had to be strong when all she wanted was to break. Colt held her through all of it. Didn't try to quiet her or comfort her or tell her it would be okay. Just held her and let her fall apart. When she finally stopped crying, she felt hollow, emptied out, like a wound that had finally been drained of poison. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling back. "Don't be. I got your shirt wet. I don't care about my shirt." He cupped her face in his hands. "Listen to me. What he did wasn't your fault. What you did in response was survival, and you're not unnatural or crazy or any of the things he said. You're the strongest person I've ever met. And if he walked through that door right now, I'd kill him myself." Elara let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's very romantic in a terrifying way. I told you I'm not good at romance." She leaned her forehead against his. They stayed like that, breathing the same air while the storm raged on. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "That I'm too broken. That even if we try, even if we want this to work, I won't be able to. That he broke something in me that can't be fixed." "Then we'll be broken together," Colt said. "I already told you that." "What if broken isn't enough? What if it is?" Elara pulled back to look at him. His eyes were red-rimmed. She realized he'd been crying too. "When did you start crying?" she asked. "When you did. You're not the only one who walls off feelings. I've been doing it for 5 years. But sitting here listening to what that bastard did to you, all I could think about was Sarah. About how I hurt her by not being what she needed. And I thought maybe we're both paying for other people's sins. Maybe we are. Or maybe," Colt said slowly, "we get to choose. Choose to stop paying. Choose to start over. Choose each other not because we're broken, but despite it." The wind howled, the house shook, the fire burned. And Elara made a choice. She kissed him. Not gently, not tentatively. She kissed him like she was drowning and he was air. Like 5 years of being told she was too much had finally broken, and she was going to take exactly what she wanted. Colt made a sound deep in his chest. His arms came around her, pulling her closer. He kissed her back with 5 years of his own starvation, 5 years of holding back, 5 years of being afraid to want anything. They broke apart, gasping. "I don't know how to do this," Elara said. "Do what? Want someone. Trust someone. Let someone touch me without flinching. Then we'll figure it out together, slowly, at whatever pace you need." "What if I need fast? What if slow feels too much like thinking and I can't afford to think right now?" Colt searched her face. "Are you sure?" "No. But I'm tired of being sure. I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of protecting myself from everything, including things that might actually be good." She kissed him again. This time he didn't hold back, didn't ask if she was sure, just kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission. They moved upstairs, not breaking apart, stumbling on steps, laughing when they hit walls, into his room, his bed, into something neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. And there in the dark, while the storm tried to destroy the world outside, they destroyed each other's carefully built walls instead. Elara learned that Colt was gentle, even when desperate, that he asked permission before every touch, that he whispered her name like a prayer. Colt learned that Elara was fierce even when vulnerable, that she gave directions instead of hoping he'd guess, that she cried when it was good and laughed when it was awkward and never once pretended to be anything but exactly who she was. They learned each other slowly despite the urgency, memorized scars and stories, mapped bodies like territories that needed exploring, and when it was over, when they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like sweat and sex and something like hope, Elara didn't feel broken. She felt whole. "Say something," Colt said. "I think," Elara said slowly, "this might have been a terrible idea." He went still. "Why?" "Because now I know what I've been missing, and that makes it so much harder to walk away." "Then don't walk away." "It's only been 3 weeks." "I know. We barely know each other." "I know that too. This could be just physical, just 2 lonely people seeking comfort." Colt propped himself up on one elbow, looked down at her. "Is that what this feels like to you?" Elara thought about it, really thought. "No." "Then what does it feel like?" "Like coming home to a place I've never been. Like finding something I didn't know I'd lost. Like—" She stopped, started again. "Like maybe broken pieces can fit together if you find the right match." Colt smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "I'm keeping you," he said. You can't keep people. Then I'm asking you to stay, not for 3 months, for however long you want. What if I want forever? Then I'll give you forever. Outside, the storm finally began to ease. The wind died to a whisper. The snow fell straight instead of sideways. Inside, 2 people who'd been surviving finally started living. Elara fell asleep in Colt's arms. No nightmares, no fear, just sleep like she hadn't known in years. And when she woke to weak winter sunlight filtering through snow-covered windows, she woke to Colt watching her with an expression she'd never seen on anyone's face before. Wonder. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning. I want you to know something." "What?" "Last night wasn't about the storm or loneliness or any of the excuses we could make. Last night was about choice. I chose you, and I'll choose you again tomorrow and every day after, if you'll let me." Elara's eyes filled with tears. "I'll let you." "Good." They lay there as the sun rose higher. Melting snow dripped from the roof. Somewhere outside, Diego was probably digging his way to the house, wondering if they'd survived. They had survived. But more than that, they'd started to live. And that made all the difference. 3 days after the storm, the world outside had turned into a landscape of pure white silence. Diego had dug them out on the second day, arriving at the house with a knowing look that said he understood exactly what had happened during the blizzard, even if no one spoke of it. He'd simply nodded at Colt, smiled gently at Elara, and announced he was taking inventory of the livestock. The mare and her filly had survived in their shelter. All the horses were accounted for. Most of the cattle had weathered the storm in the protected valleys. It could have been worse, Diego said. Much worse. Elara spent those days learning what it meant to exist in the space between intention and commitment. She and Colt moved around each other with a new awareness. Touches that lingered, glances that held meaning, conversations that started about ranch business and ended with confessions neither had planned to make. But underneath the tentative happiness, Elara felt the weight of unfinished business pressing down like the snow on the roof. Her mother was still in Denver, Sarah's diary still sat in the study half-read, and the 3-month agreement they'd made felt both too long and not long enough. On the 4th day, the mail rider finally made it through from Pine Ridge. He brought 3 letters. One was from a seed company in Kansas, one was a notice about taxes, and one was addressed to Elara in handwriting she'd never seen before, but somehow recognized instantly. Her hand shook as she took it from Diego, who'd collected the mail at the road. Colt looked up from the fence post he was mending. "What is it?" "A letter, from Denver." She turned it over. The return address confirmed what she already knew. St. Catherine's Hospital. Her mother had found her. Elara excused herself and walked back to the house in a daze. She went to her room, locked the door out of habit, and sat on the bed holding the letter like it might explode. She didn't open it for an hour. When she finally did, her hands were so unsteady she nearly tore the paper. The letter was written on hospital stationery in neat, precise handwriting. "My dearest Elara, I know I have no right to write to you, no right to intrude on the life you've built after I abandoned you, but a friend who works for the railroad mentioned seeing a tall woman matching your description board a train to Wyoming in December. She remembered because the woman was clutching a carpet bag like it held everything she owned. I knew immediately it was you. I have thought of you every single day for the past 10 years. Not a day has passed that I haven't regretted my cowardice. Your father told you I was dead, didn't he? I begged him not to, but I knew he would. It was easier than explaining why his wife left. Easier than admitting he'd married a woman who loved someone else. I left because I was suffocating in that house. Because every day with him reminded me of what I'd given up when I chose duty over desire. I told myself you were better off without a mother who was so obviously broken. I told myself you'd forget me. I told myself leaving was the kindest thing I could do. I was wrong about all of it. If you're in Wyoming, if you found the McCrae Ranch, then you know about James. You know I loved him. What you might not know is that Sarah came to me 6 years ago. Sweet, desperate Sarah who loved a man who couldn't love her back. She asked me to stay away. Said Colt was fragile, that losing me again through you would destroy him. I agreed because I'm a coward, because saying no would have required courage I didn't possess. But Sarah is gone now. And if you're with Colt, if you've found what I was too afraid to take, then maybe something good can come from all this pain. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I would like to see you, to explain, to know the woman you've become despite my failures as a mother. If you're willing, I'm at St. Catherine's Hospital in Denver. If you're not willing, I understand. Either way, know that I love you. I have always loved you, even when I was too broken to show it. Your mother, Margaret. Elara read the letter 3 times. Each time a different emotion took precedence. Anger, grief, understanding, rage, pity, love. By the 3rd reading she was crying. A knock at the door made her look up. Elara, Colt's voice, gentle, uncertain. Can I come in? She unlocked the door. He took one look at her face and crossed the room in 2 strides. What happened? She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly. She watched his expression change. Surprise, understanding, something that might have been pain. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully. What do you want to do? I don't know. Do you want to see her? I don't know that either. Elara wiped her eyes. Part of me wants to get on the next train to Denver and scream at her for 10 years of lies, and part of me wants to burn this letter and pretend she's still dead. And the other part wants to understand, wants to hear her side, wants to know if maybe we can salvage something from all this wreckage. She looked at him. Does that make me weak? It makes you human. Elara stood and walked to the window. Snow still covered everything. The world looked clean from here, simple, like all the complicated truths were buried under white silence. She says Sarah came to her, asked her to stay away from you. I know. I read that part. Did you know, before I found the diary entry? No. Sarah never told me. I thought your mother stayed away because she'd moved on, built a new life, forgotten about my father and what they had. Colt moved to stand beside her. I was wrong. We've all been wrong about so many things. They stood in silence. Outside, Diego led horses to the water trough. The filly pranced beside her mother, still clumsy but gaining strength every day. I need to go to Denver, Elara said suddenly. When? Soon, before I lose my nerve. I'll come with you. She turned to him. You don't have to. I know. But your mother is part of my history too. And besides, he reached for her hand. I'm not letting you face this alone. What about the ranch? Diego can manage for a few days. He's been running this place longer than I have. Elara squeezed his hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I might make everything worse. I don't think that's possible. They left 2 days later on the morning stage to Cheyenne, where they'd catch the train to Denver. Diego saw them off with supplies and advice, and a warning to Colt in rapid Spanish that made Colt's ears turn red. What did he say? Elara asked as the stage pulled away. He said if I do anything to make this harder for you, he'll gut me like a trout. He said all that. He's very eloquent when he wants to be. The journey took a day and a half. They sat close in the cramped stage, then closer on the train. Colt held her hand when she started shaking. Elara leaned against his shoulder when exhaustion finally won over anxiety. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. They were traveling toward a confrontation neither fully understood and both half dreaded. Denver appeared through the train window like a memory. Gray buildings, crowded streets, the smell of coal smoke and too many people living too close together. Elara had been gone less than 2 months. It felt like a lifetime. They took a room at a modest hotel near the hospital. 1 room, 1 bed. Neither of them questioned it. Whatever they were now, they were it together. That night, lying in the dark, listening to Denver's familiar sounds, Elara said, I'm terrified. I know. What if I see her and feel nothing? What if all this anger just disappears and I'm left with nothing? Then you'll know One way or another, you'll know. What if I can't forgive her? Colt rolled to face her. Then you don't. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. You can acknowledge what she did, understand why she did it, and still decide not to forgive. That's allowed. Is it, Ilara, you don't owe anyone forgiveness, not your mother, not your father, not even Thomas. The only person you owe anything to is yourself. She kissed him, soft and grateful. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just learning from you. They made love slowly that night, quietly because the hotel walls were thin. Afterward, Ilara lay awake for hours watching shadows move across the ceiling and preparing herself for morning. St. Catherine's Hospital was a 3-story brick building in a part of Denver that had seen better days. The neighborhood around it was poor but clean. Women in worn dresses swept stoops. Children played in the street despite the cold. A priest walked past carrying a basket of bread. Ilara stood across the street frozen. "We can leave," Colt said. "Come back another time. Or not at all." "No, I need to do this now." She crossed the street before she could change her mind. Colt followed. The hospital lobby smelled like carbolic and suffering. A nun in a gray habit looked up from a desk. "May I help you?" "I'm looking for Margaret Voss. I believe she works here as a nurse." The nun's expression softened. "Nurse Voss is in the charity ward, 3rd floor. But visiting hours don't start until 2 o'clock. I'm her daughter." The nun's eyebrows rose, then she nodded. "3rd floor, east wing. She should be making rounds now." They climbed the stairs in silence. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time they reached the 3rd floor, Ilara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The charity ward was a long room lined with beds. Most were occupied. Old men, young women, children with hollow eyes, the poor and desperate who had nowhere else to go. And moving between the beds, checking pulses and adjusting blankets and speaking in low, comforting tones, was a tall woman in a nurse's uniform. She had Ilara's height, Ilara's build, hair that had once been auburn but had gone gray, a face lined with years and regret. Margaret Voss looked up and saw her daughter standing in the doorway. She went absolutely still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Across 30 feet of hospital ward, across 10 years of absence, across a lifetime of wounds, mother and daughter stared at each other. Then Margaret set down the chart she was holding and walked forward slowly like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. She stopped 10 feet away. "Ilara," she whispered. "Hello, Mother." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You came. I got your letter. I wasn't sure you would. Wasn't sure you should." Margaret's gaze shifted to Colt. Recognition flickered across her face. "You must be James's son. You look just like him." "Colt McCrae, ma'am." "I'm sorry about your father. He was the best man I ever knew." "He said the same about you." Margaret's face crumpled. She visibly fought for composure. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Ilara nodded, not trusting her voice. Margaret led them to a small office off the ward. It was barely larger than a closet. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out on an alley. The 3 of them stood awkwardly. There weren't enough chairs. "I'll wait outside," Colt said. "No." Ilara grabbed his hand. "Stay, please." He nodded and leaned against the wall. Margaret sat behind the desk. Ilara took the other chair. They looked at each other across a distance that felt infinite. "I don't know where to start," Margaret said finally. "Try the beginning. Try the part where you abandoned me and let Father tell me you were dead." Margaret flinched. "Fair enough. I left because I was dying, Ilara. Not physically, but every day in that house with your father I felt myself disappearing. He was a good man, a kind man, but he wasn't the man I loved, and I couldn't keep pretending. So you just left, without a word, without even saying goodbye. I tried to say goodbye. I came to your room the night before I left. You were sleeping. You looked so peaceful, and I thought she's better off without me. Without a mother who's so obviously broken. without someone who would teach her that it's acceptable to run from problems instead of facing them. You were wrong. I know that now. Do you? Ilara's voice was shaking. Because it seems to me you're still running. You've been in Denver for 10 years. 10 years you could have written, could have explained, could have been a mother, but you didn't. Why? Margaret was silent for a long moment. Because I was ashamed. Because every day that passed made it harder to reach out. Because I convinced myself you were better off hating a dead mother than pitying a coward. I did hate you. I hated you for dying and leaving me alone with him. I hated you for not being strong enough to survive. And then I found out you weren't dead, and I hated you even more because it meant you chose to leave. I deserve that hate. I don't want to hate you. The words came out as a shout. Patients in the ward outside fell silent. I want to understand. I want to know why loving James McCrae was more important than loving your own daughter. Margaret stood abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at nothing. It wasn't, she said quietly. Loving James was never more important than loving you. But I thought I had to choose. Society told me I couldn't be both. Couldn't be the woman who loved boldly and the mother who raised you properly. So I chose what I thought was noble self-sacrifice. I gave up James, married your father, tried to be the mother I was supposed to be. She turned to face Ilara. But martyrdom is a slow poison. It killed me piece by piece until there was nothing left but a shell. And that shell couldn't be a good mother, couldn't be a good wife, couldn't be anything but a reminder of all the things I'd given up. So you ran. So I ran. And I've been running ever since. From you. From James's memory. From the truth that I destroyed 3 lives because I was too afraid to claim what I wanted. Ilara felt something shift inside her. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Sarah came to you, she said. Yes, 6 years ago. She was so young, so desperate. She begged me not to contact Colt, said he was fragile, that losing me through you would break him. Margaret looked at Colt. I'm sorry. I should have told her no. Should have fought for the chance to know you. But I'd spent so long being a coward that I didn't know how to be brave. Colt's expression was unreadable. Sarah was wrong. About me being fragile. About needing protection from truth. I know that now, but she loved you so much. And I understood that love. The desperate kind that makes you do terrible things thinking they're noble. The room fell silent, except for the muffled sounds of the hospital beyond the door. Ilara stood, walked to the window beside her mother. They stood shoulder to shoulder, 2 tall women who'd spent their lives being told they were too much. I can't forgive you yet, Ilara said. Maybe not ever, but I think I can try to understand. Margaret let out a shaking breath. That's more than I deserve. Probably, but it's what I'm offering. Why, after everything I've done, why offer me anything? Ilara thought about Colt, about choosing him despite the ghosts, about building something new from broken pieces. Because holding on to anger takes energy I don't have anymore. Because I'm trying to build a life instead of running from one. And because, she paused, because maybe understanding you helps me understand myself. Margaret reached out tentatively, touched Ilara's hand. You're so strong, so much stronger than I ever was. I learned it from you, both the strength and the fear. I'm trying to keep one and let go of the other. They stood like that for a moment, not quite embracing, not quite separate, finding a middle ground that felt honest. Then Colt spoke from the doorway. I think we should go. Give everyone time to process. Ilara nodded, turned to her mother. Can I write to you? After I've had time to think. Of course, any time. I'll be here. Margaret's voice broke. I'll always be here now, if you want me. They left the hospital and walked back to the hotel in silence. Denver moved around them, indifferent to the small trauma being processed in their midst. That night, lying in bed, Ilara said, "Do you think I did the right thing? I think you did the honest thing. Whether it's right, only time will tell. I still don't know if I can forgive her." "Then don't. Not until you're ready. Or not at all if you're never ready." Ilara rolled to face him. "What about you? Are you angry with her for staying away because of Sarah's request?" Colt considered. "I was, when I first read that letter. But then I thought about Sarah and how desperate she must have been, and about your mother and how broken, and I realized anger is just exhausting. I'd rather spend my energy on what's ahead instead of what's behind." "When did you get so wise?" "I already told you. I'm learning from you." They made love again that night. Quieter, more tender. Two people finding comfort in each other while the city slept around them. The next morning they boarded the train back to Wyoming. Ilara looked out the window as Denver disappeared behind them. Thought about her mother in that small hospital office, about Sarah's desperate bargain, about all the ways people hurt each other trying to prevent hurt. "I want to go home," she said suddenly. Colt looked at her. "To the ranch." "Yes, to the ranch, to Wyoming, to—" She hesitated. "To you." "The 3 months aren't up yet." "I know. I'm choosing anyway." He took her hand. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm choosing. That's what matters." As the train carried them north toward Wyoming, toward the ranch, toward whatever future they were building together, Ilara realized something important. She would probably never fully forgive her mother, would probably always carry some anger about those 10 lost years, but she could choose to move forward anyway, could choose Colt, could choose the life they were building, could choose finally to stop being defined by other people's failures and start being defined by her own choices. And that choice, that moment of deciding to stay rather than run, felt like the first truly free decision she'd made in her entire life. They returned to the ranch on a late February afternoon when the light was already fading and the temperature had dropped below zero. Diego met them at the gate with hot coffee and a report that everything had survived their absence. The filly was stronger. The cattle were managing. The house hadn't burned down. "But there's something else," he said, his weathered face troubled. "You have a visitor." "Who?" Colt asked. "A man from Denver. Says his name is Thomas Whitmore. Says he's here to see his wife." Ilara's blood turned to ice. Colt's hand went to her back, steadying. "Where is he now?" "I put him in the barn. Told him to wait there. Didn't feel right letting him in the house." Diego's eyes were hard. "He's not a good man, that one. I can see it." "Thank you, Diego." Ilara's voice came out surprisingly steady. "I'll handle this." "We'll handle this," Colt corrected. They walked to the barn together. With each step, Ilara felt herself transforming. The woman who'd gone to Denver to confront her mother had been vulnerable, seeking answers. The woman walking into this barn was something else entirely. She was done being afraid. Thomas stood near the tack room looking absurdly out of place in his expensive wool coat and polished shoes. He'd always been handsome in a refined way. Tall, though not as tall as Ilara. Slender. Dark hair going gray at the temples. The kind of man who looked trustworthy right up until the moment he hurt you. His left hand was wrapped in a brace, the hand she'd broken. He turned when they entered. His eyes went immediately to Colt with the calculating assessment of a man sizing up competition. "Ilara," he said as if they'd parted on good terms. "You're looking well. Wyoming agrees with you." "What are you doing here, Thomas?" "I came to bring you home. This—" he gestured vaguely at the barn, "the ranch, the life she'd built, has gone on long enough. You've made your point. You've punished me sufficiently. Now it's time to stop this childish rebellion and return to Denver where you belong." The sheer audacity of it left Ilara momentarily speechless. Colt stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere with you." Thomas looked at him properly for the first time. "And you are—" "Colt McCrae, Ilara's husband." Something flickered across Thomas's face. Surprise, then calculation, then a smile that made Ilara's skin crawl. Ah, I see. A mail-order arrangement. How quaint. He turned back to Alara. Surely you realize this isn't legally binding. We're still married, you and I. That farce of a divorce decree was never properly filed. A technicality my lawyer discovered. Alara's heart stopped. What? Judge Morrison never signed the final papers. An oversight, apparently. Which means our marriage is still valid in the eyes of the law. Which means whatever ceremony you went through with this rancher is meaningless. Thomas's smile widened. You're committing adultery, my dear, and in Colorado that's grounds for me to have you institutionalized. The threat hung in the cold air between them. Colt's hand moved to the gun at his hip. You need to leave, now. Or what, you'll shoot me in front of witnesses. Diego is right outside. I made sure he saw me arrive. Thomas was enjoying this. No, Mr. McCrae, you won't shoot me, because that would make Alara a widow and a murderess, and I don't think she wants that. He was right. Alara could see it playing out. Thomas dead. Colt arrested. Her life destroyed all over again. But then something shifted inside her. A clarity she'd been building toward since the moment she left Denver, since the moment she'd fought back, since the moment she'd chosen to stop running. You're right, she said quietly. I don't want Colt to shoot you. Thomas's smile turned triumphant. Then you'll come with me peacefully. We can discuss terms on the train ride home. I didn't finish. I don't want Colt to shoot you because I want the pleasure of watching you crawl back to Denver with nothing. Alara, you're not thinking clearly. The law is on my side. Is it? Let's examine that, shall we? Alara walked closer. Thomas took an involuntary step back. You claim the divorce isn't valid because Judge Morrison didn't sign the papers. That's a lie. I have a signed, sealed copy. But even if it weren't, even if we're still married, you have a problem. And what's that? I have witnesses. Diego saw me arrive at this ranch in December. Mrs. Henderson and Reverend Parker saw me marry Colt on Christmas Eve. Half of Pine Ridge knows I've been living here as Colt's wife for 2 months. So if you're claiming we're still married, then I can file charges against you for abandonment, for allowing your wife to live in poverty while you courted another woman, for failing in your husbandly duties. Thomas's jaw tightened. No one will believe you. Won't they? I also have medical records from the Army hospitals where I worked. Records that show I'm perfectly capable of bearing children, which contradicts what you told the court, which means you committed perjury. And I have witnesses who saw the injuries you gave me, who will testify about your violence. You have no proof of violence. I have the doctor who treated my broken ribs. I have the nurse who documented my bruises. I kept records, Thomas. Every single time you hit me. Dates, times, descriptions. I'm very good at keeping records. You taught me that. The color drained from Thomas's face. And here's what else I have, Alara continued. I have letters. Letters I wrote to colleagues in Denver. Letters where I detailed what you did to me, what you tried to do to me. I never sent them, but they're dated, sealed, witnessed, legal documentation of your abuse. You're lying. You want to risk it? You want to go back to Denver and have me testify in open court about what you did, about the nurse you were sleeping with while we were married, about how you blamed your sterility on me. I'll ruin you. You already tried that. It didn't work. Alara leaned in close enough that only Thomas could hear. I'm not the woman you married. I'm not the woman you broke. I fought my way out of field hospitals. I fought my way out of your house. And I will fight you in court if you make me. But unlike you, I'll win, because I have the truth. Thomas looked at her with something new in his eyes. Fear. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. It ended the night I left. You just didn't realize it yet. Alara stepped back. Now get off this ranch. And if I ever see you again, if you ever contact me or Colt or anyone I know, I will use every one of those letters. I will destroy your reputation so thoroughly that you won't be able to practice medicine in any territory of this country. You wouldn't dare. Try me. For a long moment, Thomas stared at her, looking for weakness, looking for the woman he'd controlled for 5 years. She was gone. Finally, he turned and walked toward the barn door, paused with his hand on the frame. "You think you're free," he said without turning around. "You think you've escaped, but you're just traded one cage for another. You'll never be more than what some man allows you to be." "That's where you're wrong," Elara said. "I'm not here because Colt allows it. I'm here because I chose it. And that makes all the difference." Thomas left without another word. They watched through the barn window as he mounted the horse he'd rented and rode toward Pine Ridge, watched until he disappeared into the gathering dusk. When he was gone, Alara's legs gave out. Colt caught her before she hit the ground, held her while she shook. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. "About the letters?" "Some of it. I kept records, but I never sealed them or had them witnessed. That was a bluff." "And the divorce papers?" "Judge Morrison did sign them. I checked 3 times. But Thomas was right that there could be challenges. Legal marriages are complicated to dissolve." She looked up at him. "I'm sorry. I should have verified everything more carefully. Should have protected you from this." "You protected both of us. You called his bluff and won. What if he comes back? What if he makes good on his threats? Then we fight, together." Colt helped her stand. "But I don't think he will. You were right about what you said. He's a coward, and cowards don't fight battles they can't win." Diego appeared in the doorway. "He's gone. Rode hard toward town. Don't think he'll be back." "Thank you for putting him in the barn instead of the house," Elara said. "I wasn't about to let a snake into your home." Diego's face softened. "You handled yourself well, like a true ranchera." After Diego left, Colt and Elara walked back to the house in silence. The sun had set completely now. Stars were beginning to appear in the enormous Wyoming sky. Inside, Colt built up the fire while Elara made coffee. They sat together in the living room, close enough to touch, but not touching, processing. "I need to tell you something," Elara said finally. "What?" "When I saw Thomas standing there, my first instinct was to run, to hide, to become small and apologize and do whatever he wanted just to make him go away." She stared into the fire. "That's who I was for 5 years. A woman who made herself smaller to survive." "But you didn't run." "No. Because somewhere between leaving Denver and coming here, between meeting you and confronting my mother, I remembered who I was before Thomas, before the hospitals, before I learned to wall myself off." She looked at Colt. "I was someone who took up space, who spoke her mind, who didn't apologize for existing, and I want to be that person again." "You already are." "Not yet, but I'm getting there." She took his hand. "Thank you for letting me fight my own battle, for not stepping in and trying to protect me." "I was ready to shoot him." "I know. I could see it. But you didn't. You let me handle it. Do you know how rare that is? How most men would have tried to fight for me instead of letting me fight for myself." Colt squeezed her hand. "You're the strongest person I know. Why would I get in the way of that?" They sat in comfortable silence. The fire crackled. Outside wind whispered through the eaves. "The 3 months are almost up," Colt said suddenly. Elara looked at him surprised. "I told you on the train. I'm staying." "I know what you said. But that was before Thomas showed up, before you found out there might be legal complications, before this got messy." He turned to face her fully. "I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel trapped." "I don't feel trapped." "Don't you? Your divorce might not be valid, which means if you stay with me, you really are committing adultery in the eyes of the law. Thomas could use that against you, could try to have you institutionalized like he threatened." "Let him try." "Elara, I'm serious. I don't want you to stay out of defiance or pride or because leaving would mean Thomas wins. I want you to stay because this is where you choose to be." Elara stood, paced to the window, looked out at the darkness that held the ranch, the land, the life she'd been building. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked quietly. "God, no. I want you to stay so badly it terrifies me, but I want it to be right. I want it to be real." "It is real." She turned to face him. What Thomas said about me trading one cage for another, he's wrong. This isn't a cage. This is the first place I've ever felt free. Free to be angry or scared or strong or weak. Free to take up space. Free to be exactly who I am without apology. She crossed back to him, knelt in front of his chair so they were eye to eye. I choose this. I choose you. Not because you saved me or because I have nowhere else to go. I choose you because when I'm with you, I like who I am. I like who we are together, and that's worth fighting for. Colt's eyes were bright. Even if it's complicated. Especially if it's complicated. Nothing worth having is ever simple. He pulled her up and into his arms, held her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you, he said into her hair. I didn't plan to, didn't want to after Sarah. But I do. I love you. Elara's breath caught. They'd been intimate. They'd shared secrets. They'd built something real, but neither had said those words yet. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since the night you gave me Sarah's diary, since you trusted me with your worst truths. They held each other while the fire burned low, while the house settled around them, while Wyoming night deepened into the kind of cold that made you grateful for walls and warmth and someone to hold. Later, lying in bed, Elara said, I want to do something. What? I want to write to Judge Morrison, verify the divorce papers are properly filed, make sure there's no ambiguity, and then I want to marry you again. Properly this time. Not as a trial or an experiment, as a choice. Colt propped himself up on one elbow. Are you proposing to me? I suppose I am. That's very forward of you. I'm a forward woman. I've noticed. He kissed her. Yes, to all of it. Verify the divorce. Marry me again. Build a life that's ours and no one else's. What about my mother? About the history with your father? What about it? We're not them. We're making different choices. Better ones. Elara thought about Margaret in that small hospital office, about Sarah's desperate bargain, about James dying before he could fight for what he wanted. You're right. We're not them. We get to write our own story. So what's our story? Elara considered. Two broken people who found each other in a blizzard, who chose truth over comfort, who built something real from the wreckage of other people's failures. I like that story. Me too. They made love slowly, carefully, like sealing a promise. And when they finished, when they lay tangled together in the dark, Elara felt something she'd never felt before. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. Life was too complicated for simple happiness. But peace. The bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning, Elara wrote 2 letters. One to Judge Morrison in Denver requesting verification of her divorce decree and copies of all filed paperwork. One to her mother, brief and honest, I don't know if I can forgive you, but I think I can know you, if you're willing to know me in return. She sent both letters with the mail rider. Then she went out to the barn and helped Colt with the morning chores, fed horses, mucked stalls, checked on the filly who was now strong enough to run circles around her mother. Normal work. Simple rhythms, the kind of life she'd never imagined wanting and now couldn't imagine leaving. At noon, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the ranch driven by what she claimed was Christian duty but was clearly nosiness. I heard that man from Denver came here, she said without preamble. Your husband. Ex-husband, Elara corrected. That remains to be seen, doesn't it? Word around town is the divorce might not be legal. Elara looked at the old woman who'd warned her on Christmas Eve, who'd judged her for her height and her history and her audacity. Mrs. Henderson, she said calmly, I appreciate your concern, but my marriage to Thomas Whitmore is over. My marriage to Colt is beginning, and what happens between us is none of your business or anyone else's in Pine Ridge, Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. Now, Elara continued, if you'd like to stay for coffee and stop spreading gossip, you're welcome. If you're here to judge or warn or interfere, you can leave. For a long moment, Mrs. Henderson just stared. Then, surprisingly, she laughed. You've got spine, girl. I'll give you that. She climbed down from her wagon. I'll take that coffee. And maybe you can tell me how you ran off that fancy doctor. Half the town saw him ride through looking like he'd seen a ghost. Over coffee, Alara told an edited version of Thomas's visit. Mrs. Henderson listened with shrewd eyes. You stood up to him, she said when Alara finished. I did. Good. Man like that needs standing up to. She set down her cup. I was wrong about you. And about Colt. Thought you were making a mistake. Thought it would end badly. It still might. Maybe. But you're fighting for it. That counts for something. She stood to leave. You need anything, you let me know. Town owes you that much for dealing with that bastard so he won't come back. After she left, Colt said, Did Mrs. Henderson just apologize? I think she did. And offer to help. That too. Wyoming is full of miracles. Alara laughed. A real laugh. Free and easy. She was home. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This time from Judge Morrison himself. Alara opened it with Colt beside her. Dear Miss Voss, it read, Your inquiry prompted me to review the divorce proceedings of Whitmore versus Voss. I regret to inform you that Mr. Whitmore was correct about one detail. My signature was indeed missing from the final decree. However, upon investigation I discovered why. Mr. Whitmore's attorney bribed my clerk to remove the signed documents and replace them with unsigned copies. This constitutes fraud and obstruction of justice. I have now filed the properly signed decree backdated to the original hearing date. Your divorce was always valid. Mr. Whitmore is currently under investigation for multiple counts of perjury and corruption. Sincerely, Judge Harold Morrison. Alara read it twice, then started laughing. What? Colt asked. Thomas tried to manipulate the system one more time, and it finally destroyed him. She handed him the letter. We were never in danger. The divorce was always real. And now he's the one facing legal consequences. Poetic justice. She kissed him. I'm free. Actually, legally completely free. That night they burned the letter, watched it curl and blacken in the fireplace. No more ghosts, Alara said. No more ghosts, Colt agreed. 3 months later, Margaret came to visit. She arrived on the afternoon stage carrying a small bag and looking nervous. Alara watched from the porch as her mother climbed down, taking in the ranch with wonder. The filly, now nearly full-grown, pranced in the corral. Smoke rose from the chimney. The house looked lived in, loved alive. It's beautiful, Margaret said, her voice catching. James would have loved seeing you here. They didn't embrace. Not yet. But they sat together on the porch, drinking coffee Diego had made strong and hot, talking about small things. The weather, the filly, Margaret's work at the hospital, the way Wyoming sky stretched wider than seemed possible. I'm thinking of retiring, Margaret said after a long, comfortable silence. Moving closer, not to Pine Ridge, but maybe Cheyenne, if you'd want that. Alara considered watching Colt work with a young horse in the distance. I'd want that. Not living together, not trying to rebuild what we lost, but building something new. I'd like that too. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. I can't give you back those 10 years. Can't undo the damage, but maybe I can be here for the next 10, and the 10 after that. Maybe, Alara said. Not a promise, just a possibility. And that felt honest. Before Margaret left, she gave Alara a small package wrapped in faded cloth. Inside was James's pocket watch, the one he'd carried the day he died. Silver worn smooth by years of handling, the engraving on the back nearly invisible. To James, who taught me time is measured in moments, not minutes. He wanted Colt to have it, Margaret said, but I think he'd want you to give it to him. A connection between all of us, past and future. Alara held the watch, feeling its weight. It still ticked steady and sure. That night, after Margaret's stage had disappeared into the distance, Alara gave Colt the watch. He held it like it might break, turning it over to read the engraving his mother had written so long ago. Your father loved my mother, Alara said softly. My mother loved your father. And we love each other. Maybe that's the whole point. Love doesn't repeat. It evolves. Colt wound the watch carefully. It still worked. Still kept time after all these years. The ticking filled the quiet room like a heartbeat. To evolution, he said. To evolution. Ilara agreed. He set the watch on the mantel next to Sarah's photograph, not replacing it, not hiding it, just making room for both past and present to exist together.